Hi there. I'm Elena. I'm a Houghton University graduate. I'm a licensed master social worker and community organizer in Buffalo, New York, and I'm here to talk about the Houghton College pronoun situation. In 2023, on April 19th, Shua Wilmot and Reagan Zelaya, two residence hall directors at Houghton University, were let go for having pronouns in their email signature and for saying stuff in public that Houghton didn't like. Here is their story. Now, it's safe to say many of you have heard of Houghton University for the first time this week or last week or whenever you opened your news app in the last month or so. And that makes sense because some of you graduated from Houghton College and didn't realize it ever became a university, and the other ones are just people who live anywhere else but in Western New York. And I'm saying that because Houghton is incredibly small, and that's a huge factor in what we're going to discuss today. Is it's in a heavily isolated area. It's really close to Letchworth State Park, which is considered like the Grand Canyon of the East, so there's natural isolation through those like gaps. It's in the northernmost tip of Appalachia, and if you have any history of Appalachia, you understand the poverty and isolation that occurs in those areas. And I'd also like to point out that you can't get to a grocery store unless you go a half hour, if not 45 minutes. You can't get to a hospital within a half hour, and if you want like a good hospital with like safety and so forth, you're going to Buffalo, which is an hour and a half, or Rochester, which is about an hour and a half as well. I'm saying this to say Houghton doesn't understand what it's like to have media at Houghton. There are people that don't even have cell phones that work there, and like, good for you. I mean, I love that you live off the grid, but when you go from being someone who had a flip phone until 2020 to having every single major media, whatever, website, news station, CNN, whatever it is, you're gonna be pretty freaking nervous. I mean, this is not what you're used to. And if you're a kid who grew up in Houghton, you're just used to what's called the Houghton bubble. That is a phrase that anyone who lives there uses to talk about how isolating and insular the college can really feel. Some people really like it. They feel like they escape from like the stresses of reality. Some people feel like it's actually a barrier for the college, for preparing kids for the real world, because Houghton is so isolated and different than anywhere else you go. It's not like a real preparation. But I think that really, like anything, it's very neutral. I mean, a lot of colleges are in rural areas. It has to do with the effort you're trying to put in to make sure that you overcome those barriers. And in some respects, Houghton does create like activities and stuff on campus. I think the biggest issue is transportation and so forth. And I think that's going to also play a factor in what we discuss, because I'd also like to point out, when you are fired or leave Houghton, you are not going to get a job down the street like you might say in even like where I grew up in Batavia area. There's a community college, but if I got fired from GCC, I could at least go to like Geneseo, UB, and I'm still can live where I'm at. With Houghton, you're basically moving, or you're having a significant drive for work. And I think that plays a huge role in a lot of what's happening. And I just want to give that background so people understand, like, this is not a college that gets a lot of critique often, because there isn't a town or a newspaper or something to critique it. Really, there isn't the outside forces that kind of keep things going, and that's for better or worse. I'm not saying the media is always great. I'm just explaining that there are people here who would not know media, whatever. They don't watch TV, they don't do any of that. And so that is pretty intense for somebody that works at Houghton. And I'm sure some of you are listening to this like, holy crap, but trust me, this is the least of your worries and what's about to come. That being said, let's get to the belle of the ball, that pronouns letter. April 19th, 2023. Reagan Zelaya, hand-delivered. Reagan, you previously tendered your resignation advising that you did not intend to return next year. However, as a result of your refusal to remove pronouns in your email signature, in violation of institutional policy, and false and defamatory statements attributed to you in the recent Star article, please be advised of the following. You are being relieved of your duties effective immediately. Woof. Your email and network access will be terminated immediately. Double woof. All keys, other than to your personal apartment and university property, laptop, credit card, etc., must be turned in to Mark Smithers immediately. You may not use any institutional social media account you may have access to. All remaining contractual salary will be paid on May 19th. Health and other insurance benefits will cease May 31st. You will vacate your apartment by the end of the day on May 19th. Your presence on campus should be limited to your apartment, get your mail, and to get meals in the dining hall on a to-go basis only. Ooh, house arrest. If you wish to be in any other parts of campus, permission must be received from Mark Smithers. Aw, we love when a man has to give a woman permission to do shit. If you have any questions, please contact me. Sincerely, Nancy Stanley, Associate Director of Human Resources. Now, while I didn't think to video the first time I read that letter, I did get Neil Breen to reenact how I felt when I read it. So please watch. And don't laugh, it's really serious, okay?
Oh my God.
Now, some of you might be thinking, how did we get to a point where a human being who is cisgender and straight is able to get fired like that? And let me tell you, it doesn't happen overnight. And anyone who thinks it happens overnight, I don't know what to tell you. Pay attention more. Nothing happens overnight except for, like, overnight delivery. Everything else takes time. And I'm here to discuss the timeline of events at Houghton, because this is the tip of a very big iceberg of a history of things going on in this regards. Now, I'm going to start from what I know because I was there. I'm going to use a lot of, like, public information. I'm not going to use, like, anecdotal evidence and so forth in this, just because it's really not, like, a complete commentary video or, like, a T channel or something. Like, I want to explain the relevant information that's actually, like, factually down. And I also want people to understand that, this isn't like some, like, shocking new development. This is something that has been going on. So let's start with the big one. We have a Rainbow Alliance on campus, which was a huge deal. It opened in about 2019, 2020. It was after I graduated in 2018. And that was a huge deal, because when I was there, the battle was over changing the community covenant so that it didn't say homosexual behavior, which is an incredibly subjective term, was banned, but that it actually just was very vague, and even changed the term from homosexual to queer or LGBTQ+, which is, like, more, I don't want to say in vogue, but it's just, like, the correct terms these days. Like, homosexual is such a, like, outdated term. I don't think I ever heard it used except for on, like, Minion memes on Facebook. So, I mean, just in that regards, it's just embarrassing from an academic sense. It's not even what you would use, like, in a paper or something. So that happened. And when the Rainbow Alliance happened, they were actually connected to the college. So they had signed, I forget what it's called, but they were, like, receiving, like, college funds for this. And they also, around this time, was the We Are Houghton event at Homecoming. I don't go to it, so I don't remember. Homecoming. There was a We Are Houghton event, which was about queer students telling their stories and putting it in, like, the art gallery and so forth. Very controversial, but it was a really big deal that it happened. And it seemed like a step forward in the right direction for folks who were particularly worried about this issue and the treatment of queer students on campus. That being said, with We Are Houghton, that group had continued on with letters to the president when it was Shirley Mullen, who was prior to Wayne Lewis. In January 2023, another letter was sent to Wayne Lewis regarding the treatment of LGBTQ plus students. This is also like after students have been coming out being hate crimed. When I was on campus, one of my friends, I won't give their name, but they were hate crimed. Someone used the F slur in that letter and so forth. So it's not like this was a place where like safety and security for queer people was always guaranteed, because a lot of people were so afraid to come out that they were afraid to say that they had been SA'd or had been in a situation like that. I would like to point out, for every student that's at any college, Title IX actually protects you with like the police over any like school rules, especially with like drinking and so forth, if you are SA'd. So just keep that in mind. You do have rights, and they do go beyond wherever you're at. That being said, when we get to this point, it's not as if Wayne Lewis and Houghton University, didn't know that like this was an issue. Like, they were very aware, and there had been good faith attempts by alumni who really actually care about the college. Like, I mean, we're talking like some people were like professors' kids signing this. We had people who were super involved on campus signing these things. Like, these were not people who are like Houghton bashers or like super anti-church. These were kids that like really loved Houghton, and they wanted to see it be better in their mind. And that's why, and I'm saying that like I hold that opinion as well, that it would be a positive thing. But I want to point out that like, regardless if you agree or not, like students like really caring about an issue and trying to dialogue is always like a positive thing, because it shows that they're keeping up with the college. A lot of colleges can't say kids do that. I'm saying kids about adults that have graduated from college, but you understand. So it's not as if this is a new thing. This is an old thing, and it's even older than me. I mean, I came onto campus with this being a consistent discussion in our school newspaper and things like that. I also think that changes the narrative a little bit from like, oh, Houghton was just so wonderful and there was like this great dialogue and then this happened and now it's ruined. Like, that's not true either. Like, these were not like great dialogues. I mean, I remember one of the dialogues we had about LGBTQ plus inclusion in the school included a kid standing up, reading all of Romans 1, and then just sitting down. And then, like, after that, like, nothing. Like, there was no lead up. That was it. That was the discussion. So, I mean, like, these weren't always, like, nuanced or, like, they were a little rough, okay? Like, we're not talking, like, big discussions here sometimes. So, that's just a little background on the college. But I think it's unfair to talk about Houghton and its structure before you talk about the Wesleyan Church, because Houghton is a Wesleyan college. So, before we can even talk about anything else going on, we can't understand this without understanding the theology of the Wesleyan Church. Like Houghton University, many of you heard of the Wesleyan Church for the first time last month, and that makes sense. It's, again, a very small church that split off from the Methodist Church in the 1800s over the issue of abolition. In this case, the Wesleyan Church was on the free the enslaved side. And then after that, I don't really know what they do social justice wise. I'm going to be honest. It's not real clear after that, but they did do that. And John Wesley and Charles Wesley, who are the two brothers who started the Wesleyan and Methodist churches, respectively, are like really famous hymn writers. They're from the UK. If you are like just super jammed about this, you can go stand in like some spot in London where, like, I forget which Wesley, their heart was like strangely warmed, and it says that on a brick. I don't know. You can go to London and pay money to look at a piece of tree behind a freaking piece of glass because Queen Elizabeth stood under it. It's just, that's a very London thing to do. But I'm saying this because, like, Houghton, the Wesleyan Church hasn't been open to a ton of critique. I think the last major critique I saw of the Wesleyan Church was when they opened that coffee shop. I can't remember the town, and it was like, really, really expensive, and they were saying it was a community thing, and then people were saying it was gentrification because it was owned by a church and like a money-making thing, and that community center should be free. It was like not a huge thing, but that's like the last time I saw them in something, at least in the media. Beyond that, they're not like super involved because they're not really part of these like big non-denominational churches. There are like mega churches within the Wesleyan Church, but again, it's like kind of a smaller thing. They're located in Indiana. That is their headquarters. They have 6 colleges, including Asbury University and Seminary, which keep that name in the back of your head. Remember that. But that is another college. That is the one from the revival that you guys may have heard of. It was like they stayed in their chapel for days on end worshiping, and then like half of them had COVID by the end, and it was like, I don't really actually care about that. If you want to lock yourself in a chapel and like sing songs for a month instead of doing work, I think that's awesome for you personally. Like, go for it. I just personally wouldn't do it. But that is the like last thing they did that was like big news. And those aren't, in my opinion, particularly scandalous or anything. Really, I mean, they're just issues of opinion. Whatever, but they've really not been like some big scandal church, so you're not going to look up the Wesleyan Church and find like these dark secrets or anything. That being said, I am going to give you the structure and their theological thought points on LGBTQ rights, which I know that the New York Times did publish, but also just their views on things like connectionalism and other factors that I think play a role in Houghton College and them sponsoring that college. Now, here's the thing with Houghton. Houghton is, from my understanding, completely under the like influence of the Wesleyan Church in that they have to affirm the Wesleyan Church's general central is the better term, central thoughts and values, which means that you can't change Houghton if you do not advocate for a change in the Wesleyan Church. It's just not going to happen. Either Houghton leaves the Wesleyan Church, which isn't going to happen because they actually, I don't think financially would survive apart from the Wesleyan Church at this point, but also just you're not going to change anything if you don't change the sponsoring denominations of these colleges, because the colleges are always going to side with that sponsoring denomination. It's kind of a weird thing to think about for people who went to like public colleges, but essentially think of it as if you went to a public college, they can't do anything beyond what's like legal in like a state way. So it's the same idea, but just with like a church body. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot of Christian colleges that are Protestant or evangelical, and they are sponsored by their denominations. So I really encourage kids, when you say you're going to a Christian college, to actually look at the denomination it is, because that is really important, because that's, especially in theology classes, that's the sponsoring theology. That's what you're going to learn. I have mixed feelings about, like, I understand, like, the Wesleyan Church wants to have Wesleyan pastors come out of their Wesleyan college. I get that. I personally, like, if I was going to any seminary, I would actually want to learn about, like, all the different denominations and stuff and just see what's going on. That's just a personal preference. I know seminaries that do that. Houghton's not a seminary, but I just want to point that out, that it is hand in hand. Every theology professor, I believe, as well. No, this has to be it. They are part of the holiness movement, which is a section. It's like Nazarene, Wesleyan, those kind of groups, and they have to be ordained in that. So I want to point out that that is a thing. So to say that Houghton College is in this vacuum and they're making these decisions without other groups is completely like erroneous and unfair. So let's just talk about the structure of the Wesleyan Church, because I think that's more important. The Wesleyan Church is, like I said, they own 6 colleges in the country. They have a publishing house as well. The district superintendent of Western New York is Joey Jennings. He's also the chairman of the board of Houghton. Again, I think this solidifies that Houghton is always going to go in the theological and social directions of the Wesleyan Church. I'm giving this information because I really think people are sending letters and complaints to the wrong groups a lot of the time. And I think it's important to know, and this is like my community organizer hat going on, it takes time to understand the structure of something. And right now, the only way to impact this structure is to go to the Wesleyan Church. Again, I'd like to point out that Shua wrote a letter to the Wesleyan Church because he understood this, and that was actually in the reason he was fired. They called it a threatening letter. He has posted it on social media, and other groups have posted it. I think REAP LGBTQ, which is a group that's suing Christian colleges for taking federal funds and then having exclusionary policies. That was like one of the things he brought up was sexuality and gender. So I would like to point out that, and regardless if you think the Wesleyan Church told him to fire him, if it was still like the pronouns thing and that, I don't really care what you think. I'm just saying that it's very clear that you're not going anywhere unless you change the actual stance of the Wesleyan Church. Whatever you want to do with that. The Wesleyan Church thinks straight cis people are the only people that exist, basically. I don't know how else to put it. Like that it's like a lot of word salad for that. The Wesleyan Church is $5 million in debt, so it's not like they're rolling in dough. All of their financials are completely public for audits. I also encourage people before they go to any college or anything like that. I know it sounds boring. Go look up their financials are. It will impact how you go to college. There are 22 district superintendents. We're going to take a picture of them right now. What a diverse group of people that are the district superintendents. Now, I shared that just to point out that it's not like we're dripping in diversity either. Now, the Indiana, Maine, whatever, does have some diversity. But I do think it is important to notice that the Wesleyan Church is not diverse. Now, this is something the Wesleyan Church is pretty aware of, I would say. It was always a topic of discussion when I was at college. I personally can't believe they didn't even throw one white woman in there. Like, it is 22 white dudes. I actually was pretty shocked. That to me is again another thing where it's like, yo, if you want diversities on your campus, your church denomination should be structuring that diversity, and then that would be mimicked better on the campus because the people that are literally like setting up your policies and so forth are that diverse. I think that's always been kind of an ongoing critique. It's something I want to point out because as well, the Mosaic Center is something that I've noticed like Wayne Lewis is so hyper about. Like most people are really mad about the pronouns thing and the firing, and he's just like all about that Mosaic Center. So I'm also pointing that out just to say that like diversity, like the reason people were worried about diversity is they don't see it in the Wesleyan Church. And I'm saying that as an honest critique of something they can genuinely change if they intentionally want to change it. I'd also like to point out just how one votes in the Wesleyan Church, because I think it's also important to know that they do have a voting structure, so things can't change. The Wesleyan Church believes in a theological point called connectionalism, and connectionalism is the idea that while different churches might have individual beliefs on things that they see as like innocuous or not super important, they have central values that every church holds, and that's what connects them. That was a very crude definition, but I'm saying that as well to say that if one Wesleyan church and they all like believe that LGBTQ plus being basically excluded from leadership, from relationships, things like that, that those groups, like that's a central value, so anything that's Wesleyan has to hold that value. That's just how it works. That's the structure. And if you understand that structure and that theological thought point, it's easier to understand how we get to these points, essentially. The Wesleyan Church has a conference every year where there are people to vote on issues like LGBTQ plus inclusion, like drinking, because it was a joke when I was in campus that grape juice was Wesleyan wine because you can't drink, and so forth. The voting members of the Wesleyan Church are ordained ministers and licensed ministers, and they have to have a church family that they're delegated to. Now, I'm Presbyterian, and I'm an elder in a Presbyterian church, and the one big difference between Presbyterians and, say, Wesleyans is that when you are assigned a church, the Wesleyan Church just kind of tells you where you're going to go. You don't really like choose the church. It's decided for you, essentially. I'm sure like people discuss it with their district superintendent, but overall, like the church doesn't pick you and you don't pick the church. Whereas in Presbyterianism, it's actually like the opposite. The pastor decides what churches he would like to go to and applies for them like a regular job, and then the church has like a pastor interview with like all the members and so forth, so it's like a decision amongst both to see if it's a good fit. one of the reasons I'm actually Presbyterian is because of this. I think it just makes more sense. Like, for example, in a Wesleyan church, like, they could move you, like, while your kid's, like, a junior in college or something, you know, or high school. Well, both would suck. Anyway, all I'm saying is that I personally think that it makes more sense for my pastor to get to choose where they want to go and for me to get to choose my pastor. That's just a thing. But I think it also shows as well that I find churches and groups that, like, choose like the calling method, or you're gonna go here, like they believe like God told them where to go. And I would say like Presbyterians would say that too, but the Wesleyans are putting it like in God's hand, or like where they're led, or where there's an opening or something like that. It's honestly, again, this is like a total choice of opinion. I'm just explaining that not every church is this way, that has a structure similar, that there are differences. It's also notable that there are non-voting members that can go to conference at the Wesleyan Church. This includes a licensed or ordained pastor that does not have an appointment. I personally thought this is kind of weird, but I guess there's a reason for it. Interesting to me. I actually never knew this stuff. If you transferred from another denomination to be a pastor, you can't vote. I almost think that's like only a year long, but I don't remember. They also have students who can vote. They have, students can't vote. So you can't be a theology student and vote in the Wesleyan Church. My mistake. Missionaries cannot vote, even if they are appointed to a church they planted out of the country. I don't know. It's just what happens. And interims don't vote, which that kind of makes sense. But I'd like to point out, like, that is the structure, and there is a structure to make change. Theoretically, I'm giving that structure because if you are someone who really does think like the Wesleyan Church could change, or you think Houghton could change, this is a genuine way to do it. I think the one thing that makes it hard is you have to be an ordained pastor to vote, but that is actually pretty common in most churches, whether you like it or not. But that is the structure of the Wesleyan Church. And I think if we understand that, we can understand like some of what Houghton is doing and why it makes sense. I think it directly does impact that these two were fired, because it was the Wesleyan Church's theological stance that essentially led to that. It's also, I think it's a little fishy that not just that they had the pronouns, but both of them were fired for like other stuff that involves speaking out about an issue with Houghton. Although I personally think Shua's was like a lot different, because he actually wrote the letter privately and didn't come public about it and so forth. But whatever you want to say about that, that's just really, how it works. And if you're interested in understanding things more, I think, like, regardless if you want to be a religious person, the structure of religion's very fascinating to me. And I think it's something worth looking into, especially if you want to understand America these days and voting and stuff like that. I think the general American not understanding these things is actually really a harm more than a benefit, because these are people that, like, their faith, their structure, their ideas and theology directly impact how they vote, how they act, what they do in the community and so forth. So take a look for yourself. Like I said, all this information's super public. Check it out. I guess it's on to the next thing. And that's Houghton's overarching college consortium, CCCU. The Council of Christian Colleges and Universities, and its head, Shirley Hoekstra. Now, many of you are saying, the CCCU? Alina, what is that? And also, why did you just move your camera? So now I'll be sick while I watch this. And to that I say, I don't know, but I can't answer the CCCU question. But first we have to go back to Houghton a little bit. See, in 2020, the Supreme Court decided that it would allow for Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, Altitude Express versus Zarda, and RG and GR Harris Funeral Homes versus Stevens to be awarded to the plaintiffs, essentially saying that you cannot fire an employee merely for being gay or transgender on the account of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. However, Houghton and a group of other Christian colleges in the CCCU became involved in what's called an amicus curiae. And in these cases, that means it's just someone who, as a friend of the court, provides insight or a perspective they might not have thought of. In this case, the perspective was, but we're Christian and we want to fire people. And that was the perspective. That wasn't mature, I know. But anyway, that happened. And some of you may be saying, Jesus Christ, when does Houghton stop? To which I say, they're not that powerful, but let's just get into why this is important. See, the CCCU has been involved in politics quite a bit. And I think, again, we can't ignore these like little niche groups because we just think they're tiny, because they have been impacting your politics for some time. Shirley Hoekstra, who heads the CCCU, is a personal friend of Betsy DeVos, who was the Department of Education Secretary of Education, whatever it is. She was the head of education with Donald Trump. You know, that president guy. And while Betsy DeVos wasn't necessarily the worst of the worst in the Trump administration, which, to be fair, that's quite the race for what is the worst of the worst. I haven't decided yet. But I will say that her view of religious colleges was that we were not having religious freedom in terms of freedom from religion, or that religion would have freedom from government. And when you think about Betsy DeVos holding that view, it makes a lot of sense that she would be good friends with people at Christian colleges who want that freedom from government, especially when it comes to the LGBTQ plus issue. Specifically, Betsy DeVos and Nancy Pelosi met with Shirley Hoekstra and a bunch of other folks in a conference on Christian colleges and how they would move forward in this country. One thing to note is Betsy DeVos gave money to Willow Creek Association outside of Chicago. You may know Willow Creek Church. Look it up. Have some fun tonight. Grove City College. That's a Christian college in Pennsylvania that is a friend of Houghton. And Hope College, which is a Christian college in Michigan, also a friend of Houghton. I'd also like to point out that Shirley Hoekstra was specifically quoted in the Washington Post when Betsy DeVos was hired as someone who knew her well. And Richard Mao, who was a Houghton College, I'm one too, alumni. Goodness gracious, I'm keeping the pauses in so you know I'm crazy. Anyway, he actually spoke at my graduation, and he worked with Betsy DeVos at Mars Hill when Rob Bell was kicked off and spoke highly of her in this article. Again, that's another Betsy DeVos, Houghton, CCCU connection. I'm not saying that these people are lobbying every day, but I'm saying that they have friends in high places, and they talk to those friends in high places to do things like fight Title IX things that Obama did that make it easier for people who were SA'd in a college to get help, or making it so that you can fire people and get like religious freedom by firing people for being gay. I'm not saying Shirley Hoekstra is the mastermind, but I'm saying she tends to find herself in places where politicians are. And that is kind of part of her job. I will say, like, policies do matter, but I do think it's interesting that people like Betsy DeVos, who are by and large seen as sort of these like Republican supervillains, are like our personal friends. I don't know if it's a good look, and it's not something I would personally be like bragging about, but I did find it interesting. And again, it informs Houghton. The CCCU wants protection for people to do things like fire folks over this. If the CCCU isn't fighting for this, Houghton doesn't get that protection. So again, Houghton's part of this group. They're a voting member of the CCCU. And in order to do that, they have to keep the sort of central values and morals and so forth. And because they're actively fighting in public policy to make it so that you can fire folks on this particular issue, tells me the CCCU would like to do this for a long time because they're trying to solidify that they can. As well, when Betsy DeVos was hired, Shirley Hoekstra did find herself in Georgia with a couple of folks, one of them being Earl Earhart, who is a Georgia representative and a member of ALEC. ALEC is the policy group that you may know as the bad guys from the documentary 13th. I'm not going to go into ALEC tonight, but look them up. And I would just say that I don't know if people would appreciate this. I think a lot of folks who go to Christian colleges, Houghton especially included, do not see it as a political move. But when your heads are meeting with one side of the political aisle constantly, I will say she met with Nancy Pelosi once, but Betsy DeVos was there. I do think that that does make people feel a little icky, especially when they seem to be teaming up with a certain side. I also just think a lot of folks don't want their Christian college to play politics. I think there is two sides to that issue. I do think it's interesting. And again, I think that it shows that Houghton is not in a bubble. If you want to change Christian colleges, you need to change the CCCU because, as I mentioned earlier, the CCCU will kick out people who do not keep their morals and just general values and so forth. So if Houghton were to switch and say, yeah, we're going to allow this, the CCCU is going to boot them out of the CCCU. And I don't think Houghton could also financially withstand that. I think that's another part. This is going to be kind of short, but I think it's important. Look into the CCCU, see what the other colleges are doing. This is going to be an issue you see across the CCCU. These colleges are getting sued right now with REAP LGBTQ for taking federal funds but being discriminatory. And Shirley Hoekstra has been decidedly pretty arrogant about that lawsuit, in my opinion, that just the way she carries herself in regards to responding to that. But I've got to say that she's got to be a little nervous because just the whole optics of it is really bad. However, nothing is as good. CCCU, whatever. Wesleyan Church, whatever. But Wayne Lewis, I was not expecting, because I had to look into him. This man is writing letters. He's going on Bob Lonsbury. I was like, what's his deal? Why did Wayne Lewis end up in Houghton? Why did he end up in the CCCU? Wayne Lewis used to be the Department of Education something or another in Kentucky. It's more important than his job now, in my opinion. Why would you leave a sick gig like that to come to Houghton? So I did a little research, and yeah, it's pretty good. Now, Wayne Lewis is the 6th president of Houghton College. He is also the first person of color to be a president of Houghton College, and he was awarded awarded like he frickin' ran a race for it. He applied and got the presidency in 2021 after Shirley Mullen retired. Now, he hasn't been there very long, so I'd like to point out a lot of the history of Houghton I talked about really is not about Wayne Lewis. The amicus brief isn't about Wayne Lewis. A lot of these issues with like isolation and stuff, like that's not him. So I'd like to point out I'm actually going to discuss Wayne Lewis and into when he enters Houghton, so it's understandable what is Wayne Lewis and what was Houghton, the Wesleyan Church, the CCCU. I think that's actually another thing that people might not understand. Houghton grads definitely know this, but I think like the general public wouldn't. So I'm going to explain that because I'm also trying to show that, again, Wayne is hired as a product of the culture at Houghton. You hire Wayne because you want him to keep certain values, and he's holding those values tightly. I think that the one thing that people weren't expecting Wayne would do was to be a little more direct. I will say, like, I don't think I could, like, handle it because I just don't always agree with how he particularly words things and so forth. But I will say this in defense of Wayne Lewis: Houghton is not used to direct communication like that. It's a very passive, almost too passive group sometimes, and that it might be alarming when at other colleges how Wayne Lewis acts is like, I'm not saying it's like great, but like how he communicates, how direct he is and stuff, like that's not like the most abnormal thing. I do want to point that out. Like that is a honest critique of Houghton. Like sometimes they just gotta get it out because I do think some of these problems have piled up because of an inability to confront things and just be very clear and honest. I actually saw a YouTube comment on the Christian Broadcasting News interview that he did that said that it wouldn't be fair for people to put pronouns in an email at Houghton because it would be like a bait and switch, making them think that they would be accepted there and they wouldn't. Now, this person was coming like from a conservative standpoint, but I actually agreed with the overall idea that like false advertising that you will be inclusive of this group when that's not really true isn't fair. And I can't disagree with that. I don't think that's 100% like why Wayne did it, but I do think like that's a very like valid point. I would be pissed if I thought I would be accepted completely as something and then I get there and then I can't. So that's a fair thing. I mean, there's more nuance to it, but I do want to point out that particular aspect of it. Now, Wayne Lewis is also not a Houghton grad, and that's pretty weird for Houghton because they love hiring Houghton grads. That's like all they do down there. And I actually put, when they like had the search for the president, that I wanted a non-Houghton grad as the president because I thought fresh eyes would be really good for the college. I think you can get too insular sometimes, and that people's personal like affection for the college would sometimes get in the way of like realistic ways to handle it. So actually, when they said they hired someone who wasn't really connected to the college, when I like took a cursory glance and saw what he had done before, I was like, wow, like that's very interesting. You know, I was pretty shocked that someone with his particular like set of like background would be interested in Houghton. And that's actually part of the reason I looked this up, because I was just very like confused. Again, part of Houghton's isolation is Wayne Lewis and his family is the Houghton black family. I'm just saying that like it's not diverse. So like to be a black person to move there is like a big deal, because you're not getting like your community, your culture in the same way you would in another like place, even in another smaller community, because it is just really white there. And if you've ever been the only person of a certain race or ethnicity and you're the minority, like you know what it feels like to not have that same culture and so forth. So I do want to point out like all of those factors. Now, Wayne Lewis is from New Orleans, Louisiana. He grows up a normal way. He goes to a private Catholic school where he... Oh, the cops are here. Okay. Where he does actually major in like music. He does jazz music in his first couple of years of college. His actual real goal as a kid was to be a jazz musician. He was very from everything that's I've read, he was very motivated. He went out into like clubs and, well, I shouldn't say clubs. He went out and did gigs even as a kid. And so he actually was like really focused on this. And I'd also like to point out that Wayne Lewis was born in the 70s, which means that as a person of color in the South, like in that time period, to be able to go to private high school is a pretty big deal. His parents must have made like an insane amount of sacrifice to do that. And I do want to point that out. I'd also like to point out that even if we disagree with like things Wayne Lewis is doing, it's still not okay to be like racist or to make racially or even like body shaming comments about him. Like he's still a person, and like racism's still bad whether you agree with someone or not. I've always been like generally annoyed that, I don't know, I just feel like sometimes white people think like once a black person does something they don't like they have an excuse to like be racist, like a get out of jail free card, and like that's not, no, like you can't do that. And I'm not saying people are, I'm just like notating that because I do want like white people, especially as a white person, to know like I know that it's easy to fall into be like, oh, let's be racist now because it's okay, and it's just never okay. Tangent over. Back to the story. Now, Wayne switched halfway through being a jazz musician in college to going into criminal justice. And he originally was going to go for a federal law enforcement position, which, again, I think this is like a very... like, the path to a Christian college president doesn't usually start this way. It was pretty interesting to me personally. He then, when he was searching for a job, his mom told him that he should go into education. So this is a really weird thing for me. So in like New York State, if you wanted to be a teacher, you would have to start over, and basically he'd probably only have to do a couple years, but he would have to go and get like an education bachelor's degree. However, he was able to get a like teaching certificate and immediately start teaching within a year and a half or so forth in Louisiana. He did that for 2 years. He's taught at 2 schools over 2 years. Hurricane Katrina hit, and he was forced to relocate in North Carolina. Again, that's a huge tragedy. If you're not from the United States and you're watching this, Hurricane Katrina might be like one of the single most traumatic natural disasters I ever saw, like as a kid. It impacted that area for years, like to the point where when the Saints won the Super Bowl, like 5 years later, it was still like a huge issue that they were discussing. It was like a big like news story about how people were still impacted. So I'd like to point out, like, he really went through some shit. He was homeschooled. He was homeless. And he had to move like out of like where he grew up, everything he knew, to North Carolina, and that sucks. And I would also like to point out that definitely being a person of color impacted that, because he didn't have protections like white people do in that area. Again, like, I want to be very fair in that, like, this is quite the story. Like, that's really intense. It's in North Carolina that he works at a high school for 3 years. He specifically works in special education. That is like his particular specialty. I didn't want to say specialty after special education, but that's all I could think of. But he did win like some awards. I actually kind of looked up because I was really curious, like, what kind of teacher he was, because that is like his degree. Like, oh, like, what do people think? I couldn't even find like a rate my professor or anything. I don't know if like he just didn't teach enough, but I just was curious. I couldn't find anything. I don't know. I always like to see when people have like something like that, what they did. But when he was in North Carolina, that's when he pursued a master's degree in urban studies. I didn't think that was something that would easily go into education, but I believe because his focus was educational policy, that's specifically why he went into urban planning and then went into educational policy. The degree is in educational leadership, which I actually really hate that because it makes the degree sound like really like pointless. Like, educational leadership sounds like a made-up degree. I think educational policy is essentially what he really did major in, and that makes more sense. He majored in educational policy and eventually ended up at the University of Kentucky, where he taught for like 9 years and worked at the workforce an education policy group. Is that what it's called? I'll have to look that up. I'm going to bring it up again. But up until this point, his like career is just absolutely like going like hyperdrive. Like, we have a guy who was homeless who's now like getting a doctorate and works at University of Kentucky. And Kentucky is really where like I'm just going to be full on. Like, I think he wanted to stay in Kentucky the rest of his life. Like, I think he liked it there. He was in Louisville. He had a really good job with a lot of good connections. His child was born there. It's like clearly like somewhere he really liked. And when he was in Kentucky, I think the worst thing he ever did was get into politics. And I do want to split this up because I think this is where things really change for Wayne Lewis. This is Elena from the future, here to finish out this video in what is a far uglier outfit and look, locked in her house as wildfires frickin' put ash all over her car outside. So anyway, back to Kentucky politics. So, you know, Wayne's got it made. He's got this sick gig. He's on the Workforce and Education Policy Cabinet. And he is just, you know, vibing, I guess. He's writing stuff about charter schools. You can actually see an interview on PBS Kentucky where he talks about what he wrote in Parents' Choice and Black Choice, which are two pieces he wrote about charter school options for minority groups. Now, everything changes when Matt Bevin wins the governorship of Kentucky. Matt Bevin is famous for a lot of things that aren't good, like being a big Trump guy and having 9 unvaccinated children he runs around to give everyone chicken pox. And he also did things like overthrew the entire Board of Education in Kentucky and replaced it with all people he liked that specifically liked charter schools, including 3 individuals: Milton Seymour, Gary Houghton, and Hal Heiner. Now, Milton Seymour, Gary Houghton, and Hal Heiner all created a nonprofit called Kentuckians for Charter Schools with Wayne Lewis a few years prior, and it's also noted that Hal Heiner is listed as Wayne Lewis's political mentor in his interview with Plexus when he took the job at Houghton. I'd also like to mention Hal Heiner was an Asbury College Board of Trustee member. Yes, the Wesleyan College I mentioned earlier that did the revival. Hal Heiner was on their board, and then in 2018, Wayne Lewis was on the board for Asbury, which again shows there's a Wesleyan connection to these individuals. It also makes more sense to me now why Wayne would know about Houghton College, because he would obviously have heard about it when he was working at Asbury. Connection made. Now, Hal Heiner becomes the head of the Board of Education in Kentucky. They force Stephen Pruitt, who was the Commissioner of Education, to resign and replace him with interim Wayne Lewis, who, after doing no national search, they just give the permanent job to. The first thing Wayne does is within 2 weeks is takes the biggest public school system in Kentucky, Jefferson County Public Schools, and tries to do a government takeover. Ironic, coming from someone who wants less government taking over the largest public school system so that there's no barrier between government and people. A little ironic. Anyway, he does this because, I mean, honestly, Jefferson County Public Schools are struggling. There's a lot of issues, but this immediately sets him at odds with teachers who are already kind of pissed because of his, essentially his connections to Hale Heiner, his pro-charter school stance, the no national search. It just all starts off really bad. Now, the teachers do protest and win. This becomes big news. If you want to see like the articles on this, the Courier Journal in Lexington did a fabulous job on covering it. One of their authors, Olivia Krauth, won a Pulitzer Prize over this whole thing. So, I mean, quality journalism. Hats off to you guys. Local journalism forever. Go for it. Tangent over. Whatever. Anyway, so Wayne has already pissed off the teachers with the whole takeover thing. He's like, you know what will fucking slap is if Matt Bevin goes in and just overnight basically makes it so our $38 billion we have to give teachers in pensions we don't have, we're just gonna make a hybrid plan for new teachers, and we're gonna actually take a sewage and sanitation law and then rewrite it for 291 pages of ways to deal with their pension debt that screws teachers over directly. Now, what they really wanted to do was essentially make it so that teachers' pensions were in jeopardy because they weren't able to pay it. And Kentucky is the worst funded teacher pension group in the entire country. It's not like they were making a lot anyway. He essentially wanted to restrict using sick days to calculate retirement benefits of current teachers, and he wanted to change how the state can pay off its pension debt. Now, this obviously immediately enraged teachers who were really hoping for that pension because they, want to be paid after having a really crappy underpaid job in Kentucky. It's very you have a right to be mad when your money's being messed with that you've rightfully earned when you signed your original contract. And this just sets Wayne off where it is Wayne Lewis versus the teachers of Kentucky. And the one problem with facing off against teachers is that teachers are a kind of neutral job. It's not a politicized job in the country. Everyone knows a teacher. Everyone loves a teacher. And this ended up uniting Democrats and Republicans in Kentucky against Matt Bevin and against Wayne Lewis because they agreed that as teachers that there was no political reason that they wouldn't there was no, bias as to why this was a good thing. They actually united. They found a way to find a bipartisan group because of how bad Matt Bevin basically was. And there are articles from Time Magazine, NBC News, that show Matt Bevin lost his governorship to Andy Beshear, who ironically is the attorney general who blocked this pension plan from actually happening over the education thing. There's interviews with Republican teachers who voted against Matt Bevin because of his treatment of teachers. And this is absolutely bonkers to me. Kentucky is a deep red state that was very pro-Trump. This is Mitch McConnell's state, who actually flipped a Republican governor over the mishandling of education in Kentucky. I can't tell you how disastrous this is. It all comes to a head, and this is the kiss of death, when the teachers form a sick-out. Now, in Kentucky, as is pretty common in a lot of Appalachian states, if you want to know why that is, read What You Are Getting Wrong About Appalachia by Elizabeth Cady, one of the best looks at workers' rights groups in Appalachia. Now, what Wayne does is when they do these sick outs, which is using your paid sick time to not go to work, and then so many people didn't go to work, all the schools shut down as a form of protest, he asks for the individual names of all the teachers who did a sick out, which there's only one reason for that: retaliation. The teachers have someone he can talk to if he wants to talk with someone to dialogue. And he, in all of his interviews, says that's not what he wanted to do. He's really mad. That's not happening. But this is really objectively, this was when he's not going to keep his job. And so Matt Bevin loses the governorship, and Andy Beshear actually ran literally ran his governor campaign with the promise of firing Wayne Lewis and replacing him. That is how much people did not like him as the commissioner, is because like when you can win an entire campaign over firing someone, like, it ain't good. So with this history, Wayne basically gets run out of Kentucky. He resigns before they can fire him. He tries to apply to be the head of state education in Louisiana. They say, yeah, no thanks. And then he goes to Belmont University, which is a Baptist CCCU college in Tennessee. He starts their inaugural education program. There's not much there. He has one interview with the Tennessean about his history and so forth. They do have one presidential campaign while he's there at Belmont, and he heads an essay contest for that. And after that, there doesn't seem to be a reason why he really left Belmont, besides he just wasn't feeling it. That's when Wayne arrives at Houghton. Now, like I said, when he arrived at Houghton, I didn't understand everything that happened in Kentucky. But now that I know that he was well connected with some Asbury College folks, he basically got ran out of town, and he wanted to continue on in like this policy level job with education in Louisiana. It makes sense why he would now go to Houghton, which is in New York State, which has a lot more opportunities for ways to impact politics or just get into like these policy groups and so forth, just because we are so close to a lot of different major cities. We're more populated. The state is just different. So Wayne comes to Houghton, and when he comes to Houghton, he just kind of shows up. The biggest thing that happens is that Rainbow Alliance, I mentioned earlier, decides to step away from the college and not be connected because Wayne wanted them to sign like the Houghton like statement of faith or something, and they refused to do that and just cut off from the college. Now, Rainbow Alliance chose to do that. That was not like Wayne kicking them out. They it's on their Instagram where they like said, like, you know, we no longer want to affiliate with Houghton College. Here's our reasons. So a year goes by. I don't know, he's just there. They make cuts. Houghton's always making financial cuts. Houghton has been in debt for like years. So Houghton making cuts isn't like the biggest thing in the world. And so this next upcoming year, they make more cuts. And one of those is to the Center for Sustainability. And they cut that director, Brian Webb. Now, I knew this was happening in around January because he had stated that he's moving to Ohio because he had lost his job there. Now, the reason that the Center for Sustainability got connected in this issue with Houghton and the pronouns is because Wayne Lewis fired those residence hall directors the day before the Houghton One Day of Giving. And so what happened, it was kind of this perfect storm. He writes this letter, Reagan posts it. In the letter, it states that she is fired for pronouns and also for saying something defamatory in the Houghton Star, which is the newspaper, about the Mosaic Center closing. I'd like to point out, I think the reason the Mosaic Center, people were thinking that was a budget decision is because it got mixed up with the Sustainability Center. That's not true. The Mosaic Center building, the room, was just shut down. There's no monetary gain or loss to that, and they turned it into like a theology room basically. So Emmanuel scholars, chapel deacons, groups like that meet there. So a lot of people were ticked because they feel like the entire college is a theology room, and that was the only like safe space for people of color. He did state, and he has said this numerous times in the letters he's like written in response, that there are still 2 paid positions at the Mosaic Center. I actually went on Houghton's website, and that is true. And they will have hired them by now. I think in February is when everything was due for that position. However, it's not like diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's now considered intercultural ambassadors, which that wording change, I think for a lot of people is like, they're not having it. I will also point out, when you fill out the application, because I fake filled one out just to see what was on it. It's not like crazy, but it does say list your ethnicity, cultural background, and missionary kid and third culture kid were 2 of the ethnicity and cultural backgrounds, which I have an issue with that, because I don't mind if somebody who is white but literally ethnically from a different culture, say Eastern Europe or something, but 2 white missionary kids can both get that job. And I think that's something people have a right to be a little critical of, I guess. But that is not, I would like to point out, the Mosaic Center is not a budget issue. It's really switching the mission of it issue. Whereas the Center for Sustainability is a budget issue. And the reason that it gets hooked up with the pronouns thing is because the one day of giving was the next day, and the one day of giving was also 2 days before Earth Day, which means that people were like, oh, so you care about the earth, but you cut environmental studies and sustainability. And then it got into, oh, you cut the Mosaic Center. Oh, you fired these 2 people, and that it all got kind of bungled together. I would like to point out the Mosaic Center and the pronouns thing being connected. And I am just calling it the pronouns thing because I'm not going to repeat myself a million times, but because Wayne put them in that letter together that he wrote to Reagan, and I think that was just poor. Like, he should have been very specific in the letter in a more direct way. I know I said he is more direct, but in that sense he needed to be more clear and concise, because that is also causing a lot of the issues. I will say, in the alumni letter in response to all of this, I felt that the alumni were very upfront that they cared about all these issues knowing they were separate, but that they just wanted to dialogue about all of them because they did care about all of them. He took that as we lazily connected things that weren't there and put words into his mouth. You can read his public letters. They're not very good. Actually, you know what? Let's read it together. Dear Dr. Kumar and Dr. Brooksford, thank you for your letter. Second only to engaging with Houghton students, engaging with Houghton alumni is one of the most enjoyable parts of my job. I have the opportunity each week to hear from alumni like you who have had transformational educational experiences at Houghton. The value of a Christ-centered liberal arts and sciences education, and one at Houghton specifically, is immeasurable. I am thankful for our sponsoring denomination, the Wesleyan Church, and the many generous donors, most Houghton alumni, who continue to make a Houghton education affordable. The most Houghton alumni slayed me, and accessible for deserving students. We have so much to be thankful for. Most recently, more than 2,000 of Houghton's faithful alumni and donors came together on our one-day giving challenge to raise more than $1.8 million for the second consecutive year, exceeding our goal of 1,883 donors, and our annual student scholarship fund goal. These dollars will be well used as Houghton prepares to welcome its largest incoming class in some time to campus, including our inaugural group of Founders Promise Scholars from New York State and across the U.S. I am also thankful for the outstanding faculty who continue to provide just the type of challenging learning experiences for our current students that you have referenced in your letter. And as we move forward, we continue to innovate and build on current and historic Houghton strengths. For example, the Houghton faculty recently approved program concentrations in certified financial planning and cybersecurity. Just as in generations past, Houghton students are graduating exceedingly well prepared for the rigors of professional school, graduate school, the military, seminary, ministry, and the 21st century workforce. He forgot the T in military, so I was kind of a bitch. Anyway, understand that you have circulated this letter publicly and widely among Houghton alumni, as well as current students and employees. I also understand that many alumni and some current students have signed your petition, but the information you have shared in the letter is incomplete at best and incredibly misleading. If I only had the incomplete information you shared in the letter, I too would be concerned about Houghton's future. In some cases, I believe your vision for Houghton is different than that of the administration and the Wesleyan Church. Well, no shit. Disagreement and dialogue about these disagreements is fine. There's too many disagreement in the same sentence, and can be healthy. In other places, however, you have either not provided full information, provided misleading information, or left out important context for understanding why decisions have been made. In the interest of space, I will not address all of your points here, but I would be more than happy to schedule time for conversation with you to address some of the other points, not in the hopes that you would agree with our decision making, but so that our dialogue is based on complete and accurate information. First, perhaps based on a desire to summarize, you have considered together some important decisions made in the last year that have no relation to each other. And in other instances, you have not accurately communicated our decision making. For example, the closure of the Center for Sustainability was a budget decision. I assumed the presidency of Houghton in June 2021, with the university having sustained many years of enrollment and revenue decline, and a significant structural budget deficit. That's a nice way to say you have 871 students on campus. As president, one of my immediate priorities has been bringing the university's expenses in alignment with its revenue. Closure of the CFS is one of those budget reduction measures. I am fairly confident that with its establishment, which as you know predates me, the hope was that the CFS would lead to increased enrollment in the environmental studies program and attract external financial support to sustain it. Neither of those have materialized. The environmental studies program has attracted very minimal student interest, and the center is currently 100% funded by university funds. That's generally how majors work. Going forward, we will continue to support and grow the university's program in environmental science and encourage and support Houghton students as they form a student-led sustainability student organization. As a budget reduction measure, if you were to categorize a CFS decision with other university decisions, it would be appropriately grouped with other budget-saving measures, including but not limited to cuts or the elimination of positions in the president's office, advancement, engineering, international studies, theology, business, psychology, and data science. Wow, what a way to just list that you cut like everything. Taken together with cuts in those areas, the closure of CFS does not fit the political or ideological narrative some have tried to force it into. It should also be noted the letter communicates the decisions regarding the Mosaic Center was only half informational and inappropriately categorized the decision with the decision regarding CFS. I have explicitly and consistently communicated that while the space of the Mosaic Center is being closed, there have been no cuts to programming. The programming component of the Mosaic Center is the Ambassadors Program, which has not been touched. Communicating only that the current administration is closing the Mosaic Center without sharing the whole story is incredibly misleading. As I have communicated, this decision was made after considerable discussion with stakeholders, including students who have frequently occupied the Mosaic Center, students and staff who have been in leadership in the center, the diversity committee, and others. It is unmistakably clear to everyone I have heard from that the Mosaic Center in its current form and function is no longer achieving the university's aims. Unfortunately, in its current form and function, the Mosaic Center makes entering into rich intercultural learning experiences challenging for many in our community, including many students of color. Many individuals view the space currently as exclusive and unwelcoming, leading to few students engaging in the learning experiences the space was intended to foster. Let me be very clear. I heard and continue to hear this from current Houghton students of color, international students, and employees who support students of color and international students on campus. As such, the decision was made to protect the programming of the center while distancing the programming and the university's goals from the center and any associated unhelpful baggage. Oh my God. Okay, it's still going, guys. I'm so sorry. While the current starting halfway through, my cat bit me, I got mad, and I had to feed him dinner. Anyway, while the current version of your letter does not include reference to East Africa, I am aware of communication circulated widely with the letter that references Houghton's East Africa program. Well, I want to make sure you are aware that the decision predates me. I can share, however, that the financial model previously used for the East Africa program is unsustainable. I can also share that I would be happy to engage any Houghton faculty member who is interested in rebuilding and leading the program with a sustainable financial and personnel model. Our administration has prioritized growing international engagement for Houghton students. You should expect to hear more about those efforts in the coming months. I also have seen information circulated with this letter stating that my administration has closed a branch of the school in the heart of Buffalo. I'm going to stop right there. There were two satellite campuses in Buffalo, one at Symphony Circle, which is at First Presbyterian Church. Ironically, that church is pastored by someone who openly affirms and does gay weddings, LOL. And then the other one was at the King Center on the east side. One of the reasons that actually was closed is because in New York State, there's a lot of rules and regulations about how many colleges can be in a certain amount of mileage from each other that offer internships. I specifically know this because I'm a social worker, and you can't have too many MSW or BSW programs, so internships are fair. So that actually was a decision like that. I think the one thing people were upset about is that it is a more sustainable transportation situation for people who might be lower income. But I will say I do know a little bit about that just because I'm from Buffalo and that was part of the issue. Back to the letter. This language is at first very misleading. First Houghton Buffalo East Side continues to serve students and will do so at least for the next few years. The actual change to Houghton's programming in Buffalo is that we are no longer accepting new students to Houghton University Buffalo. This decision comes after more than a year of advocacy by my administration to secure the approval of a Buffalo East Side Extension Center. This is actually true. They tried to combine Symphony Circle and the King Center together. That was happening. And I can say that for sure. I think some people thought maybe they could have advocated better, but I will say I do know that. And I worked at the Houghton Buffalo too, so I did know how it worked, and it was a good program, actually. It was really helpful to refugees and people who recently got out of incarceration, so it was a really useful program that helped the community. So I do want to give props to that program when it did run. After considerable opposition from Buffalo area colleges, the state declined to approve our application, so Houghton Buffalo remains as extension site. It is also important to note that Houghton in recent times has not had approval as a campus in Buffalo, only as an extension center on the west side at Symphony Circle and as an extension site on the east side at the King Life Urban Center. Neither of those designations permit the institution to house programs at those locations or to admit students directly to those locations, only to offer coursework. As such, blah, blah, blah. This is a bunch of, legal crap. Finally, for now, I will not sign your statement of affirmation. I have been consistently and explicitly clear about my priorities and the direction of the university. Houghton provides an intentionally Christ-centered, academically challenging education in the liberal arts and sciences to students from diverse traditions and backgrounds. Doing so requires that we attend to the financial and enrollment matters of the institution. It also requires that we prioritize employees' salaries. From 2005 through 2022, our employee salaries have increased by 0.55%, while incredibly modest, the 3.5% salary increase provided to Houghton employees in the current academic year is the largest since 2006. I've communicated this consistently, blah, blah, blah. I will not broaden Houghton's understanding of the views that are acceptable for staff, faculty, and chapel speakers to hold and express. Houghton has not and does not require that all students be Christians. Using the language of your affirmation. Oh, sorry, I repeated that. While we require that all Houghton employees be active Christians, our employees come from a range of Christian traditions. We do, however, require as a condition of employment that all employees be respectful of the positions, doctrine, and beliefs of the university. Houghton unapologetically privileges an Orthodox Christian worldview. I'd like to stop there. A lot of people are really ticked about the word Orthodox there. I'd like to point out what he really means is he's using Orthodox as a term just like you would use like fundamentalist or evangelical. He's not using it as like big O Orthodox, but it isn't really like a good term to use because it is confusing and it really isn't accurate. What he really means is they have an evangelical Christian worldview, and I think that would be the more accurate word there, but that's just a small thing that keeps bopping around. Rooted in the Wesleyan theological tradition. At the time of their appointment, and again annually, every Houghton employee affirms his or her understanding of and agreement to these commitments. This is not a new position for the university, that's true. This positioning of the Wesleyan higher education institutions has always been clearly stated in the discipline of the Wesleyan Church and the General Board Standards for Higher Education Institutions. Both of those are available online if you're curious. And it was made, he didn't say that, I'm saying that, sorry. And it was made clear to me as I considered the Houghton presidency. Challenging discussions and diverse perspectives are presented through Houghton coursework, but chapel is not a classroom. Chapel is a time set apart for a university to come together to worship. But only Orthodox Christian perspectives will be preached and taught in chapel. Again, if you had Orthodox Christian perspectives, you'd be dragging some old Greek guy to come chant in your school anyway. Houghton students continue to leave well prepared for, okay, I don't really give a crap. In closing, I'm sure I've made decisions you disagree with, and I'll continue to make decisions you disagree with. Yes, that is true, Wayne. But in the spirit of respectful Christian dialogue, let us have conversations based on complete and accurate information. Well, that was a lot. I would like to point out, after all the information I gave you, really that letter shouldn't be the surprising response. I will say, I think that his second letter, which I'm not going to read because that was like literally 10 minutes long for me to read that one's like has a more like, I don't know, there's like a different tone there, and he definitely, I think, pissed off more alumni with the second letter than the first one. That being said, I would like to point out just a couple of things before I wrap up this here video. The main one is just that, you know, he did respond. I will say the last letter we sent, the response we got was basically like, thank you. And I do think it's basically not worth it. Like, you can write letters till you're blue in the face, and Wayne Lewis isn't going to change his mind and stuff, and I think that's just important to note. But I do think some people do it because they want current queer students to feel supported and loved on campus, and that's super valid, and I understand that. That being said, there was a lot a lot of words in that letter. You can read it for yourself. The Wellsville Sun has a copy of it on their website. I do think, honestly, do I think that was a good response to all this? Not really. The one thing I thought was interesting is he brought up chapel. So interesting side note, when I was in college, Dean Jordan, Michael Jordan, not the, basketball player Space Jam guy, although like how sick would that be if he was our Dean of Chapel? Anyway, but Michael Jordan, who is the Dean of Chapel, used to be on the President's Advisory Board when Shirley Mullen was there. Now, it seems that Wayne Lewis has shook up like the advisory board and kind of like the administration side. So I noticed Dean Jordan's not on the advisory board, and actually no current employee from my understandings on the advisory board, which is pretty interesting to me. I don't know how you're getting, unless Wayne is saying he's bringing the campus perspective. I just thought that was kind of curious because I think a lot of people see the Dean of Chapel as like that campus perspective. The other thing I'd like to notice is Wayne Lewis isn't the only administrator at Houghton. Another administrator, like I'm just going to list all the administrators because I think as well, like if you have an academic issue, he does look that over, but also like there are Title IX people and provost and Title IX people, a Title IX director and a provost and different groups that do different things, because at the end of the day, whether you believe it or not, realistically, Wayne is not the king of Houghton, he's the president of Houghton, which means he's not the only person there. Now, I do know right now that the president is Wayne Lewis. The Title IX director is actually someone that he taught in Kentucky, which that's actually pretty normal. Like some people might be like, oh my gosh, but like I think most people hire their own students a lot of the time. I see it all the time. The provost is actually a Houghton professor who came back. His name is David Davies. I wouldn't want you to confuse him with the Welsh politician also named David Davies, who for some reason does charity boxing tournaments as the Tory Tornado. There's no reason I told you that besides that I have to know it, and so now you do too. And if you have questions about stuff, you can also go to any of those administrators on the website and ask them about their department and what they do. I think that understanding what they do can help you work a little. Hi, this is Elena again from the future. As you can see, the quality's down because I unhooked everything. I just want to point out I only listed the provost and I didn't even give the name of the Title IX director. Greg Bish is chief of staff. Natasha Davis is your Title IX director, and she also is strategic planning. Jason Towers is vice president for enrollment. Carl Sisson is vice president for advancement. Matthew Webb is athletics. And Dale Wright is the vice president of finance. So all those people do those things and know that. Yay! A little differently. I'd also like to point out that it's not that everyone is just, this is a giant, like, we shit on Houghton moment. There is an I Stand With Houghton letter, which I am going to read. I will warn you, the grammar in this is so bad that some people sign the petition, petition that does not stand with Houghton because they were so mad at the grammar with this. I also want everyone to know it says there are 750 signatures on the I Stand With Houghton. I know at least 25 to 50 of those are people who made fake emails and fake names to see the other names on the list because they don't make their list public like the other petition did. Unfortunately, from what I've heard, if you sign this petition, you can't even see who else signed it. So those people just, had their dead cats and stuff sign this thing for nothing, but I find that funny. So also take the 750 signatures with a grain of salt because I did see names like the Reverend Paul Bufano on there. However, let's just see what the other side says, and then we're going to go to the conclusion. I stand with Houghton. By signing, I affirm. In response to the national and international media attention given to Houghton University over the last few weeks, I support the following. I affirm President Wayne Lewis's statement in a recent letter to the Houghton community stating, first and most important, we love, value, and respect people, all people. Okay, we already read this. I affirm Houghton's beliefs following Orthodox Christianity and Wesleyan doctrine that men and women are created uniquely and distinctly as separate entities made in the image of God, equal in value, and both with vital and profound callings for the edification of the church. I affirm Houghton's desire to be a solidly biblical institution in a time of unprecedented and rapid change in our society. I am grateful that Houghton seeks to understand and follow the Bible and build significant relationships built on love. Collaboration and forgiveness. I affirm that following biblical principles against the cultural headwinds can be unpopular in today's environment, but the following biblical precepts is appropriate regardless of popularity. Oh, that was so bad. It should be R. Okay. I affirm the Bible and its sufficiency to establish faith and conduct, and Houghton's decision to choose obedience to Orthodox Christianity, oh my God, it's evangelical Christianity, Jesus Christ, and Wesleyan doctrine over personal preference. I'd also like to point out, like, saying this is against the cultural headwinds is interesting because, like, there's so much anti-trans legislation, but, like, whatever, go off. I affirm the desire of Houghton not to drift along, following whatever culture says to think, but instead to look to the Bible as a key factor in guiding the curriculum. Faculty, research, chapel, residence life, and campus clubs in accordance with God's will rather than the agenda of any one person or group. This is interesting because there are, like, genuinely, like, devout Christians who are gay and, like, have gay relationship. Like, this is so odd because it is really an opinion issue. I affirm Houghton's longstanding tradition for faculty and staff to be held to high expectations in accordance with Orthodox, again, evangelical Christianity and Wesleyan doctrine, with the point of these regulations and expectations being to show students that living together may mean giving up some personal penchants so that the whole community can be oriented toward Christ in a way that is safe, welcoming, positive, and distinctly Christian. I affirm that despite a growing gap between the gospel and our culture, the Bible is God's holy word, holy wasn't capitalized, WTF, and uniquely and infallibly reveals God's plan for his people. I further affirm that the Bible reviews how to live out that plan individually and corporately. Therefore, clear biblical teachings must anchor beliefs, practices, priorities, and mission. I support President Wayne Lewis as he seeks to lead Houghton with the courage to live fearless and according with Orthodox, oh my God, Christianity, Wesleyan doctrine, and a desire to follow Jesus, speaking the truth in love. Also, I'd like to point out fearless is their hashtag right now. They did take out the language that said trans lives or something. Like, there was like a weird wording where, like, they used trans as a noun instead of an adjective, and they've clearly edited some stuff out because it was a little rougher before. I'm feeling they got roasted online. That is the affirming one. I mean, you can sign that if you affirm it. Just know that some of the signatures on there are, they're fake. They're fake. Actually, I think most of them might be. Anyway, I'd like to just say thank you to you all for listening and come in for my sick conclusion. In conclusion, there are ways that Houghton can recon this baby. There are ways that Houghton can change course. There are ways the CCCU can change course. There are ways the Wesleyan Church can change course. There's ways that everybody can change course and do things just a little differently. But I think the biggest takeaway is sometimes it's good to... Yeah, Henry, are you tired of this shit too? Such a sweet boy. Anyway, I think the biggest takeaway is... kind of follow the money trail and see where things are going, because everything's more connected than you think and everything goes a little deeper than you think. The media is not going to do a full-on investigative journalist piece on Houghton. They're going to give the most sensationalized view, the pronouns thing, and spread it. And as each article goes through, each one has a bit less information and less interest. I think this is where the story really is. The story is in how these groups are all connected, on how everything happening here is years in the making. The media isn't going to look at that. They're looking at this tip of the iceberg. You don't want to play, Henry? Demanding. Here, he has a wand. And these are just the issues that are all over America. I'm not saying that we need to go rush and protest Houghton. I will say this, they get most of their money from enrollment, and the only way that these groups are going to change their mind is when they stop making money. That's just how capitalism works. And if you do want to see a change, you can write letters. I'm not going to stop you. Sign a petition. I'll probably sign it too. Heck, you can show up with a sign and protest. But I'll tell you the one protest that always works, and it's the one that loses the people with money the money that they want. Think about it. And also, I'm really bad at ending things, so I will conclude this the Nintendo 64 way, before Henry bites my leg off. I
know. Thank you so much for playing my game. 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 Thank Thank you so much for playing my game. 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 Thank you so much for playing my game.
Thank you all.